First Things, episode number 35.
I seem to be lost.
And so you're working around the clock so you don't take time for yourself to feel like an actual human being.
I used to feel like no matter how hard I worked, I was just spinning my wheels.
Trying to be perfect, we try to have everything in place at one point in time, and you can't.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to First Things, the podcast dedicated to practical productivity based on modern research. My name is Brandon Vaughn, and it's my goal to help you apply productive solutions to your life to help you live with less stress, greater passion, and amazing results. So glad to have you back with us today as we continue our study on assertiveness. And I have to say, I wasn't really sure how everyone would respond to this particular episode, but I've heard from probably more people about this particular episode, or episodes, I should say, than I have any of the other ones that I've put out. Many of you have contacted me briefly in one way or another, just saying thank you. This is really helping me, and I'm so thankful for that. And I want to start out today, before we get back into our book, with my good friend Tori, who has written me a couple of things, and I wanted to read that for you today and comment, because I've mentioned that Tori has some great ideas on things, and also we have a blast when we actually can get together and talk about some of these issues, because we're like cosmic twins. I've mentioned that before, I think, on the show. It's just really interesting how alike we are, or how much we enjoy talking to each other about these types of things. So Tori wrote me a couple of things, and I wanted to kind of read them to you. I'm sure you're this way too, but my level of assertiveness can vary all up and down the scale depending on how I'm feeling, whether I'm in a group or one-on-one, how much I know about the subject matter, and even based on who invited me to the meeting. For example, did someone ask for my help, or did my boss just add me to the invite last minute? My level of assertiveness with you, and he was speaking to me, even is drastically different from my assertiveness, say, with another person. And I do think that's true. You know, he did mention that this was something that we had talked about in a previous episode, and surely whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, we will find ourselves in a varying degree of being assertive. The thing that I've really been kind of tossing around in my mind is, if we do label assertiveness as more about choice, that we are choosing what we do in life, whereas passive is basically retreating from choice. Aggressiveness is when we're dominating our choice, and passive-aggressive is when we're being sneaky about our choice. Then I think assertiveness, I mean, the way we're defining it, maybe it is too broad of a stroke. If we define it in that way, then I think assertiveness can express itself in passive styles, or maybe more upfront styles. So a lot of things that people refer to as passive or aggressive, I think many times they're meaning that I'm quiet and I'm not really talking about stuff, or I just listen. Or then there's sometimes that I voice my opinion and I actually say something out loud. And if those are how you're using the terms passive and aggressive, then yes, I go back to what I said maybe in the beginning of this program, that there are all these styles of communication, and there's sometimes when you could speak, and there's sometimes you may not want to speak. The way I've been seeing it lately, and again, maybe this is too strong, and I'm lumping everything into this assertiveness bucket, but I'm starting to see that maybe assertiveness is, again, all about this matter of choice, that we're choosing things in life. And there are times when I choose to not say something, or to voice my opinion about something. As I mentioned in a previous episode, if I'm taking my car in to get fixed, well, to be honest with you, I don't know much about engines of cars. I really don't. It baffles me. And so I'm not going to sit there with a trained mechanic next to me and say, I don't think you're right. This is what you need to fix. Look at this. Because I know that I'm not going to say anything intelligent. I know I'm out of my league here. And I feel like the way I've been thinking about this the last few weeks is assertiveness. It's just the exact opposite of what I used to think assertiveness was all about. But in that moment, I am making a choice to not speak, because I'm letting the expert speak, and I'm learning from him, and I'm dependent upon him or her to help me in this particular situation. Same thing with expressing my opinion about something, that I choose to do that. And when we choose to do these types of things, that's how I'm starting to see assertiveness. So yes, I think in various situations, how you express assertiveness will vary. So in some instances, you may not say anything. You may let something go. As Tori goes on to say, I can't count the times I've labeled someone as highly aggressive only to talk to someone else who thinks that person is a total sweetheart. I've met people who were passive as could be at work and then found out that they were highly assertive in other areas of their life. I met a guy once who appeared to be a total introvert at work, and once I got to know him, it turned out the guy was a minor league baseball player and was seen by his friends and teammates as both a leader and a really outgoing person. Assertiveness is highly situational. And I do agree with that, totally. I think the way that you express assertiveness will vary based upon situation and also your personality. The key thing, I think, going back to something I said in an earlier episode, is why are you passive if you're passive, or why are you aggressive? Because many times when people are aggressive, it's because they're manipulating people. They are buying into the lie that they must get their way, and therefore they're going to do anything by which to do that. And passive people, I think, have given up on that idea. As I said in the last episode, their whole mindset is that of a slave, that I will slave to someone else, and therefore I don't have any choices in this life. I just have to go along with what people demand of me. And therefore we're afraid to speak our mind because we're afraid of the rejection that may come about. So I think it really does depend. If I'm in a situation where, and I still face this to this day, if I'm in a situation where I don't speak up because I fear ridicule, or I fear rejection, or I fear something that may happen from that, then I know that I'm not being assertive in that particular case. I'm in a bad state of passive styles. But if I have been in meetings where I've chosen not to speak because I wasn't the expert in that moment, or I didn't have anything good to say, or for some other reason I just chose not to speak, and I feel like I was being assertive. And see, this kind of goes against how I was raised, because I thought assertive always meant you had to speak your mind. And no, what we've been saying in all these episodes is that assertiveness means you have a choice. That's the big thing. You have a choice, and if you let someone rob you of your choice to decide what you will think and what you will do and what you will say, if anything, then you've lost the whole battle there. And that doesn't mean you have to say something, and in certain situations you may not want to say something. So certainly if you're dealing with someone who's very aggressive, how I will respond to that person is going to be something that I choose a particular style. So I may or may not really voice my opinion, or how I voice my opinion will change. So for example, if I was talking to Tori about something, the way I might express my opinion would be completely different than someone who was highly aggressive and angry. Maybe I would still voice my opinion, but how I would do it would be very different. And as well, I may not even voice my opinion. I may just listen to this person. I may try to have empathy with this person and try to understand where they're coming from, or I may just need to distance myself. But if I distance myself from that person, that is my choice, to avoid that person or to remove myself from that person. And still, I think that's part of being assertive. It's just that there isn't one expression of assertiveness. It doesn't mean that you have to voice your opinion. And then the last thing he mentioned to me, he says, you asked about excuses for not being assertive, like I'm this way because others need to be more considerate. He said, mine is that I don't want to make things worse. Or my favorite variation, I don't want to jeopardize what I've already accomplished. And I think that's a great excuse. I don't think it's a good excuse, but I think it's a great example of an excuse. So Tori, thanks for sending that to me. And I think it goes back again, because I can relate to this. I can relate to, I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to rock the boat. That's another one that's kind of very much affiliated with this one that we didn't mention last week. And this is why, again, I'm on this way of thinking that assertiveness is all about choice. And I keep thinking, again, I'm just being honest with you guys, that I'm having to also go back and reframe my mind around the fact that I keep trying to make assertiveness be aggressiveness, and they're not the same thing. I keep thinking that what it means to be assertive is that I must always speak my mind, that even if it does get worse. And I'm learning that assertiveness, again, is all about the fact that I can choose, and I must also let the other person have the dignity of choice as well. But how I express that, by the fact that if I sit there and I decide that I'm not going to say anything, and I feel like that is the best course of action, then I choose that, then I am being assertive. But if I sit there and I'm quiet because I fear rejection, or that I fear consequences from it, then I'm thinking that we're not assertive anymore. Now we're dipping into other areas that I don't think are beneficial to us. So if you're sitting there, like I've been many times, and sitting there thinking, okay, as somebody that's dealt much more with passive styles of communication, to be assertive means that I can just go up to my boss tomorrow and say, I just think you suck sometimes. Does that mean assertiveness? And no, I don't think it does at all. And I think that's our fear many times, is that if I'm going to be assertive, I'm going to say things that are going to hurt people's feelings. I'm going to make things worse for me. And it's not. It's just a matter of getting over fear of rejection. In fact, I almost feel like that is all tied into it. I don't know why I haven't thought about it until this point in time, but I really feel like all of this is kind of tied back into that fear of rejection, fear of failure. So many times we are afraid to be assertive, to choose, because we fear failure if we did choose, or we fear rejection if we told people of our displeasure or other things like that. And so I think it all goes back down to that very facet. So I have those same thoughts. I don't want to make things worse. I don't want to jeopardize something. And two things I would say to that, to get over that type of thinking, is that one, we aren't talking about being aggressive. We're talking about choosing how we respond in life and respecting other people's choices. How we express that could be a myriad of different ways, vocal and non-vocal. And the second thing is that we have to get beyond fear of failure, fear of rejection, and think, what is the worst that can happen to me in a given situation? And then ask the question, okay, so what? And sometimes in our imaginations, we can think really bad things. I'll lose my job for this. I'll lose my credibility for this. And then you still have choices, though. And that's the wonderful thing about this. Okay, I have a choice here, and this could be a consequence. Now, what am I willing to live with? And as long as I'm choosing and not basing my life off of fear of failure, fear of rejection, then I think we're living in a good state. But we've got to be choosing, and we can't be choosing based upon fear. So anyway, Tori, thanks so much for your comments, buddy. I really appreciate it. Hope to talk to you soon. Keep sending me some ideas that you have, and we'll try to get together soon and talk about this. And hopefully in the near future, I'll pull Tori on this show and let you hear him talk about some things too, because I really love the way he thinks about things. Chapter 5 of the Assertiveness Workbook is called Reality Check. And this is how the author starts out the chapter. Many of the barriers that prevent us from being more assertive are in our heads, our own heads. We willingly obey imaginary rules that dictate what we are and are not allowed to do. It feels tremendously liberating to realize that the arbitrary standards we set for ourselves are not carved in stone. They do not appear in the criminal code. Now, the basis of this particular chapter is the mirror image of what the last chapter was about. So the last chapter was about stinking thinking, is what I called it. It's about all the bad types of thoughts that trap us away from being more assertive. Now, what he talks about in this chapter are what are some of the better beliefs to have? What are the good beliefs to have if you are going to try to become more assertive? What things should you replace those stinking thinking beliefs? Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm not going to think this anymore, and well, good luck, because our minds have to think about something. And so just to sit there and say, I'm not going to have this stinking thinking thought anymore, maybe it will exaggerate that thought in your head. And if I told you right now, do not think about purple monkeys dancing around the room, well, then your mind starts thinking about purple dancing monkeys. And what was one purple dancing monkey now becomes 5 purple dancing monkeys, which now becomes 50 purple dancing monkeys, and they multiply. Your mind, you try not to think about something, you end up thinking about the very thing you don't want to think about. So the way that we go about this is we have to replace the thought with something else to think about. What he gives in this chapter are basically things that can help you start thinking new thoughts or replacing those thoughts. Now, one thought that he labels as a key point, he doesn't actually label it as a thought, but I still think it's a good point that we need to bring about, is that you are in charge of your own behavior, not for other people. Other people are in charge of their behavior. And we've talked about this before. I know this could be something that people would argue against. Well, I can't change things in my work. My boss tells me I have to do this. And when it comes down to it, you still always have a choice. You have a choice of how you will respond to something. And we talked about this at length in the procrastination episodes, so I don't want to repeat that here, but would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to some of those episodes where we talk about choice. But the fact is, people are going to do what they want to do. And we can't get by with an excuse that, well, this person told me to do it and I just had to do it. No, you didn't have to do it. You chose to do it. And we cannot take the choice away from us, as much as we may like to sometimes. Quite honestly, there are times in my life where I like other people to just tell me what to do. I don't want to think about things all of the time, but the fact is we have to. It is always our choice. We must decide how we're going to act in different situations, but we cannot expect that other people will always like what our decision was. They won't always support our decision. The author says this in the book. He says, being assertive means making your own decisions about what you will and will not do, and accepting the consequences and the responsibilities for your behavior. Let me read that again because it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier. Being assertive doesn't mean voicing your opinion. It doesn't mean that you always are speaking up. It doesn't mean any of this stuff. It means that you're making your own decisions about what you will and will not do and accepting the consequences and the responsibility for your behavior. And if anything, I might add to that definition is that it is making your own decisions without regard to fear. I think definitely that we're not making decisions based upon fear. We are making decisions based upon what we truly want, accepting the consequences and the responsibility for our behavior. Now, accepting the consequences basically means that we have to be ready for the fact that people aren't going to always like what we choose, and that other people have the right to react any way they like. Assertiveness does not mean that we say to people, you shouldn't feel that way, or you can't say that. Well, they jolly well can say that if they want to. They can feel that way. That is not assertiveness. Again, this is where the definitions of assertiveness and aggressiveness get mixed up. Because if you feel that people can't say something to you or shouldn't feel a particular way to you, then it's an aggressive style or it's a passive aggressive style. Because assertiveness says you have a responsibility to choose your own path in life. I cannot choose how you will respond to me, how you will feel, what you will say, but I can choose how I'm going to respond to that or what I'm going to do in life. We hold ourselves back from saying I had to do this or they told me to do this or I had no choice to do this. You did have a choice and you made your choice. The author mentions this, that when you act on something and then deny responsibility for it, that is a passive-aggressive choice, not an assertive one. When we try to control how other people respond to us, it can be a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. It can also produce anger. It can also produce aggression. The author says this in his book. He says, when this book was in the planning stages, a well-meaning colleague suggested that the subtitle should be How to Get What You Want. This illustrates a classic misconception about assertiveness, the idea that it is all about controlling others and getting them to do or give you what you want. This is not true. A book with this subtitle would be more properly called the Aggressiveness Workbook, not the Assertiveness Workbook. Now, this can be very freeing for a lot of people listening to me right now. The fact is that you can give up controlling other people, how they think, feel, or act, because some of us, quite frankly, feel guilty for how other people think, feel, or act. If we say something and we see somebody else that's very upset or displeased by what we say, some of us will go out of our way to try to make them feel better. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea, but we cannot control how somebody's going to feel. It can leave you very frustrated to try to have to do this in your life constantly. And there's many things in life that we cannot do. There was this video, I think it was on YouTube, that I saw a few months ago where someone, whether good or bad, but it was kind of neat to watch, they strapped a camera, one of those action cameras, on the back of an eagle. And it basically showed the flight of the eagle, what it looked like to the eagle to fly, and it was fascinating. But I was sitting there and watching this. I didn't get frustrated by it. I didn't get anxious or angry about it. I thought how marvelous this was. And why wasn't I anxious? Because I can't fly. Unless I get in an airplane, I can't fly. So I'm not sitting there all upset by what I can't do. I just never can do that. And I've never seen anyone who can do that kind of thing unless you're Superman or in an airplane. So why worry about it? The fact is, I only get frustrated by things I feel like I should be able to do. And it's amazing how many people feel very frustrated because they feel like they have to help other people think or feel, act a certain way, or they have to control how others think, feel, or act. And they live their lives in great frustration. Well, the reason why you're living your life in such great frustration is because you're trying to make something that isn't possible work. You can't control what other people think, feel, or act. And if you do, it's called manipulation. And it's not something that is true from the heart of that person. It's just manipulating them from guilt or from some other type of aggressive style of technique. Fact is, we can always influence other people by giving our feedback, making requests, working on our own behavior, and that may influence how they feel, think, or act, but it isn't going to control them. And we certainly aren't going to be using intimidation for that type of thing. Okay, so let's get into some of the major beliefs that the author talks about having as part of an assertiveness response in life. Belief number 1, I decide for myself what I will and will not do. Now, again, this does not mean that if your boss says, I need you to do this report, that you tell them no. It doesn't mean that you refuse to go along with everyone's wishes. Sometimes you will go along. Many times you may go along with someone's wishes of what you do, but you have a choice in it, and you're going to choose to do this. Remember, I keep saying this. I said this earlier. This is a big secret behind overcoming procrastination. When we didn't feel like we were the victim, but we chose to embrace whatever we had in front of us, a deliberate, conscious choice on our part. And quite frankly, there's many things that people ask me to do as part of my work. And I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of it's a waste of time. I do. I detest meetings. And I've been in this mode lately. For whatever reason, people around me just want to have meeting after meeting after meeting and have meetings about meetings. And it just annoys me greatly. So I have a meeting show up on my calendar. Well, I have a choice and I can choose not to go to that meeting. But like we said back in the procrastination episodes, there's consequences to that. And I have to weigh the consequences. What are the consequences if I go to this meeting? What are the consequences if I don't go to this meeting? And now I choose which one I want. Which consequence do I prefer? And many times I will choose to go to the meeting and be bored out of my mind, but I'm choosing to do it. So I can't sit there feeling like a victim and feeling frustrated because I've given myself the dignity of choice again. And in going to that meeting, I have exhibited assertiveness. Again, it may look like passivity, but it's not, because I'm not going there out of fear of rejection or failure or anything like that. I'm going there because I've chosen based upon my analysis of the consequences. The author says this. He gives a hypothetical quote. Joan wants me to help with her shopping when she comes home from the hospital. Though it doesn't sound like much fun, I'll do it because I have the time and I value her friendship. This is a stronger, more accurate, and more self-respecting position than she asked, so I have to do it. Because you remember that helping with the shopping was your choice, not someone else's, you are less likely to feel resentful and burdened by the task. Belief number 2, I am my own judge. Now, quite frankly, there's many people who want to be your judge. They want to pass judgment on what you think, how you feel, how you act, what your motives are. And that's just true in life. You're going to have people in your life, possibly coworkers, possibly a boss, possibly a spouse, family member, parent. Somebody's going to do that. They are going to feel like they should be able to pass judgment on you. And you shouldn't be upset by that. You shouldn't be surprised by that. I wish the world was different than that. I do. But it is just the way it is. And so if you fight against that and say, well, people shouldn't be this way, well, I think you're wasting your time. People just are that way, for better or for worse. But here's the secret to this. No one says you have to agree with them. No one says you have to go along with them, because you ultimately are going to be your own judge in terms of what you think, what you feel, what you do, what your motives are. And you always have a choice here. Am I going to listen to what this other person has to say? And you can if you wish. And there's many times that I do. I've told you this in past episodes. I feel like every person is my teacher. So if I come across a person who is my judge, well, I have learned to listen to them without internalizing their motives and their anger or their aggressiveness or manipulation or whatever the negativity is behind their judgment of me, and try to look and see, is there any area in there that I can glean and use in my life to make myself better? And I can choose to use their input without taking on the judgment aspect. I can throw the judgment part of it away. There's so many things in life that are so much easier if you can learn to look for the treasure in the garbage. So many times I've met people who throw away everything because someone said something that was wrong, and therefore they discount everything that a person says. Well, actually, I think there's always some treasure in any garbage that is presented to us in life, and I think it's true in this case. But again, the truth is that you still are your own judge, and do not let someone be a judge over you. You have a choice to choose how you're going to respond, and you have a choice of how you analyze how you responded to a situation. Belief number 3, I do not have to justify myself to others. And wow, this is a big one for me, that I feel like I have to tell people why I'm doing what I'm doing or have to justify my behavior to them. They look at me a funny way. They frown. They kind of look at me in a bewildered state. And I feel like, for some reason, that I must explain myself. I must justify myself. And this has been a hard thing for me to learn, that I can choose to offer a reason, but I can also choose not to. This is, again, one of those areas of silent assertiveness, that if someone is looking at me with disapproval and they're expecting me to justify myself to them, I can just choose not to. I can just not say anything and walk off, or just sit there and just say, that's what I'm going to do. And someone's looking at me in a way that's like, you should explain yourself, mister. And I don't have to. I don't have to offer any type of excuses, any kind of justification. I just don't have to. I can choose not to do that. Here's another belief. Others do not have to justify themselves to me. Now, this is kind of the mirror image of what we just said. So if you do not have to justify yourself to others, part of assertiveness means that you have to give other people that same respect. And that means that they don't have to justify themselves to you. Now, this is where it starts getting hard, because do you really believe what we're saying here in these episodes? Do you really believe that you do not have to justify yourself to other people? Well, then you've got to give people the dignity that they have the same right. You have to give people the options to not justify themselves to you. And quite frankly, that can be hard because we want to live by double standards many times. I want to live my life in such a way that I never have to justify myself. But then we get in certain situations and we expect people, tell me why you did this. Tell me why you think this. And the fact is, that is not assertiveness. Assertiveness says, hey, I would love to know. I'm not going to demand that you justify yourself to me because I believe that that's the principle I'm living by. Here's another belief. People can ask me anything they want. We spend a lot of wasted time trying to prevent people from asking us stuff. We hope they're not going to ask us stuff. We feel a victim or we feel angry if they ask us to do something, like a boss, for example. So we try to do anything we can many times to prevent that. But life is a lot easier if we just quit worrying about that. If we just allow people to ask us whatever they want and realize that we have a choice. It goes back to that. We realize that we don't have to answer. We don't have to justify ourselves. We don't have to say yes to something, but people can ask us. And so going back again to this whole thing of justifying my actions or thoughts or motives, well, we have to give people the freedom to at least ask us these things. So do you get the whole picture here? We're allowing a person to come to us in judgment or to possibly ask us to justify ourselves. We're giving people that freedom. They can ask me anything they want. If they want to ask me to justify my actions, they can. I give them that freedom to do that. But it doesn't mean I have to answer them. I don't have to justify my actions to them. If I choose to, I can, but I don't have to. And I'm also not going to put that demand on them that they justify their actions to me. They can ask me anything they want, but I just don't have to answer. And again, this is more of a silent assertiveness. People can ask me questions and I do not feel the need that I have to answer them. And quite frankly, I know this is hard because I face this all the time. I've been learning this for 20 years of my life. To feel that somebody can demand, why did you do this? Why did you say this? Why did you feel this way? And there's this urgency, it seems like, in the situation that I must explain myself. There's this urgency. I must do it. And to be able to step back and say, wait a minute, I don't have to answer this if I don't want to. And I can choose to, just depends on the relationship, depends on the circumstances. I can choose or I can not choose. I can choose to say something or I can choose to not say something. But it's all a matter of what I feel like in this particular situation. Along with this, the author mentions another belief. My life is my own, and I can turn down requests made by others if I wish. Many of us, quite frankly, feel guilty for turning down requests. People say, hey, let's go hang out. And you're like, I don't really want to do that. And yet we do it anyway because we feel guilty for that. We fear rejection, again, out of those types of things. But you really can say no to things. Another belief that really helps us with assertiveness is to remember that people change their minds. You change your mind all of the time. And the way you think about your life today is not the way you thought about your life 10 years ago. And if you go back and think, the way you thought about life 10 years ago, you thought you had truth in a bottle. You thought you had it figured out. 10 years later, you realize you didn't know what you were thinking. You realize you weren't even at square one yet. Fact is, you can change your mind. You can grow. You've got to give other people the right to change their mind as well. So you've got to be flexible with people as well as knowing that you can be flexible about things. Here's another belief. Everyone makes mistakes. This doesn't give control of their lives to others. And I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think we have to discuss that very much. We just can't expect perfection. And we're delusional if we expect perfection, and we're delusional if we expect perfection in other people as well. Everyone makes mistakes. And even if you mess up, that doesn't mean that you owe it to someone because they mess up just as you do. So if you mess up, it doesn't give people the right to control you. And when other people mess up, it doesn't give you the right to control them either. We still remain in control. We still remain with our choices intact even when we mess up in life. Here's another belief. I don't have to be logical, nor do others. Now, this is one thing I've seen many times. When you decide something and it's just something you want to do, then other people will, this kind of goes back to the justification part. People will want you to justify, why did you choose to do this? Okay, you're choosing to do this with your life, your career, your job. You're deciding to move to this part of the country. You're what? Well, tell me why. Well, if you do decide that you're going to tell them why, then many times you'll get a counter argument if it doesn't seem logical to people. Because if you say, well, I just really feel like this is a good move, then people may challenge you and they'll say, well, that's not very logical. Why on earth would you do that? And you realize that that's basically a form of control. People trying to gain control over you by asking you to explain the logic behind your decision. And again, remember, people can ask you anything. This is another belief of assertiveness. So yes, they can try to gain control over you. They can try to explain the logic behind your decision. They're free to do that. But you're also free to respond or not respond to that type of thing. And if you want to be illogical about a decision, then it's your right. You can choose to be illogical about any decision that you want, and you don't have to explain it to someone. Another belief is that it's quite okay to be alone. You have a right to be alone. In fact, I think this is good for everyone, including people that are social butterflies. I think it's good from time to time to get away from people. And some people will challenge you. It's like, hey, we're supposed to hang out today, or we're supposed to have this social, and if you decide you don't want to do that, then you have a choice there, and it's quite okay. But make sure, again, that if you're doing that, you're not doing it because you fear rejection or failure or anything like that. It's just because you've chosen not to do that. Here's another one. I don't know everything, and I don't have to. In fact, this is a good thing to practice in your life. Saying these words, I don't know. That is very hard for some people to say, I don't know. Because many of us have been raised, or we have these beliefs that we must know. And if somebody challenges us on something, then we've got to say, yes, I knew about that. And because we fear of saying, I didn't know about this, or I don't know the answer to this, because it may make us look incompetent, and then people may reject us. Again, it goes back to that fear of rejection. The fact is, you don't know everything, so you don't have to pretend to know everything. And it is quite okay if somebody asks you something and you honestly don't know, to just say, I don't know. And you could come back and say, honestly, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll look it up and get back to you. And that would be an assertive response. Whereas saying, oh, yes, I knew about that when you really didn't, could be a passive or an aggressive or passive-aggressive response. And it's basically lying. And there's no benefit to that type of thing. Here's another belief. I have my opinions and convictions, and others have theirs. Here's what the author says about this one. To hold a certain attitude or belief, you don't have to convince the people around you to hold the same view. You have the right to your convictions even if others do not share them. This doesn't necessarily mean that your view is correct, but you do have the right to your own ideas. Similarly, others have a right to hold their views even if they cannot explain them to your satisfaction. Here's another assertiveness belief. I have a right to protest unfair treatment or criticism. And you do. This is where you may have to be vocal. If someone is mistreating you or not treating you fairly, you do have the right to say something. And if you choose not to do that, as long as not based upon fear, that can still be an assertive choice, as long as you realize you do have the right to say something. And if you've chosen not to, momentarily for some reason, then that can be okay. If you find yourself always never voicing up when someone mistreats you, then you're not dealing with assertiveness anymore. Another belief, I have the right to ask for help or emotional support. And that's hard to do, especially for many men. Many men have a problem with asking for help or emotional support, but you do have the right. You have the right to ask for this of other people. Others can give advice, but they don't make my decisions. Or how about this one? I am not responsible for other people's problems. Some people tell you their problem that they're having, and we feel pressure that we have to solve it for them. And we don't. We don't have to solve other people's problems. We can be very sympathetic toward people and listen to them without feeling that we have to always solve their problems. Solving people's problems is something that we cannot take the responsibility for. Now, obviously, if your child is sick with a fever and it's your child, well, yes, you do have an obligation to help them. But we're not talking about those types of things. We're talking about just ordinary relationships with other people. And if people decide to tell you their problems, you don't have to feel the responsibility of solving it for them. And, this has been one of the hardest things I've learned is to sit there and again, picking on you guys, all the males listening to me, Males have a big problem with this, especially when it comes to females. The females so many times just want people to listen to them, and males always have that tendency to try to solve their problems for them. And how many times have I heard women say, I'm not asking you to solve my problem, I'm just asking that you listen to me. And so many times we can't be assertive if we feel like people are asking us to solve their problems. And many times people are not, and if they are, you have the right to not solve their problem for them. And again, the mirror image of that is that other people are also not responsible for solving your problems either. Here's one belief that can be slightly controversial, and it's our last belief for today, and that is direct is usually better. And here's what the author says about this. We often feel nervous about asking for help, giving feedback, protesting unfair decisions, and declining requests. We find ourselves in approach avoidance conflicts. We want to get our way, the approach, but we don't want to take responsibility for voicing it, which is avoidance. The solution we sometimes fall into is passive-aggressive behavior, which allows us to do both. We get to avoid cleaning the garage by, quote, forgetting to do it, rather than accepting responsibility by saying, no, I'm not going to do that. The avoidance strategy often works in the short run, but passive-aggressive behavior undermines us in the long run. People become resentful, we gain a reputation for being unreliable, and life generally grows worse. The direct, non-aggressive, assertive approach is usually more effective. Now, friends, I'll be honest with you, that one I'm still working on. I feel like I'm a lot better in my life in many ways, but I'm still working on being direct because I find myself many times in many situations beating around the bush, going about 100 miles off course to basically try to say something because I fear how people may react, or I try to do it from a more passive or passive-aggressive point of view. And I've had to learn many times that just being direct is better. And again, going back to the previous week, many times we fear, especially the passive people that are listening to me, that being direct about something means that you have to be rude about it, that you have to be aggressive about it. And it doesn't have to be that, as long as you remember, again, the assertiveness is about choice and respecting other people's choice. And that you can come out and say, I feel like this is the best course of action, and leave it there. You have voiced your opinion, you've been very direct, and now you give people the dignity of either going with your idea or not going with your idea. And then that is all assertiveness. It's not about getting your way. And if it's not about getting your way, then it makes it a lot easier for this belief to be put into action, that directness is usually better in dealing with situations. Well, that's going to wrap up this particular episode on reality check, or some of the positive beliefs that we can put into place to help us be more assertive. And as I said at the beginning of the episode, think about what you mean by assertiveness, and think about what I was saying earlier about how assertive can be expressed in different ways. So it doesn't always have to be vocal. Sometimes it can be silent. It can be different in different situations. And depending on how you define things like passive or aggressive, then you may see that, well, being assertive can express itself passively or aggressively. The way I'm defining it is that passive and aggressive are both bad styles, and that being passive is because of some fear of rejection, possibly. Aggressiveness is more about control and fear of losing control. And assertiveness is really the one thing of mutual respect for all parties involved. And you may disagree with me on that definition. That's quite okay. But just know that what we're talking about here in these episodes is that mutual respect for one another, a mutual choice, a choice that we're allowing ourselves to make, a choice we're allowing other people to make. And I think as long as we keep that front and center, then we're in a good place to keep moving forward, to talk about how to put some of this into practice. And again, we're just talking about the foundations right now, the foundations of what keeps us back from being assertive, talking about some of the beliefs that really help us to be more assertive. We hadn't even gotten into the techniques of really how you do it yet. And that's, we're hinting at this. And obviously some of you are asking questions about that. We're still getting into that. 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about body language, for instance, how you can non-verbally communicate assertiveness, things like eye contact and different things like that. And that's going to be a really, great topic to talk about. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. We're just getting started on a very cool topic. So I know a lot of you are wanting to jump ahead 4 or 5 weeks down the road to talk about all the techniques of really putting this into place in your life. And we're really wanting to deal with the foundations first. And the foundations are really what goes on inside your brain. Your thinking can really prevent you from applying this particular communication style. So we've got to deal with that first. So really think about what you're thinking about when it comes to being assertive, because that can be a big hindrance to you as you're trying to apply this stuff. As always, please consider leaving me any ratings wherever you're listening to me at, whether that be through iTunes or Stitcher or anywhere like that. It just helps let other people know about the show. I would love if you left me some feedback. And you can also leave me some feedback on my website at firstthingsproductivity.com/35. So until next time, remember this. If you are trapped thinking about purple dancing monkeys, then think about striped zebras walking across the high wire at a circus. And if you do that, then you've just replaced your thought with something that so resonated with you that it made you totally forget about the previous thought. You can replace your thoughts. And so if you do have stinking thinking that is preventing you from being assertive, as I said last week, it is so tremendously valuable if you can identify what it is that you're thinking. What are the thoughts that are holding you back? And then think about what is the mirror image of that. Maybe some of the things we talked about today that you can use to replace those thoughts and say, this is the way I want to be. This is what resonates with me. This is what makes me passionate in life. This is how I view things, and this is how I choose to be. And now start reprogramming your mind. And when you start thinking those thinking thoughts, then you say, wait a minute, this is not the way I want to be. And I've said this before, and I'll say this just briefly. When you do this, it's not an automatic thing. And this is where I used to get so sidetracked, because I used to think, well, gosh, if I did it once, it should just be automatic. And no, it isn't. If I have a real bad pattern in my life of thinking these bad thoughts, I may have to take that thought and replace it maybe 10 times in a minute, not just once a day or once a month, maybe 10 times in 1 minute. I may have to go back and say, wait a minute, I'm thinking that thought again, but this is not how I want to be. This is the thought I'm going to choose to walk by in my life. 10 seconds later, that negative thought is back. And I have to say, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to live this way. I refuse to live this way in my life. Then 20 seconds later, the thought comes back. And so many times in my life, because nobody taught me this, I just started giving into it and say, oh, well, it's of no use, or I just gave in for just being exhausted from dealing with it. The fact is, if you're used to thinking negative thoughts, it will take a little bit of time for you to replace these, and you've got to just keep going after it and go after it. And if you fail, you get back up, you wipe yourself off, and then you go back at it. And you say, okay, I messed up, but I'm going right back, and here I am thinking again, and this is what I'm going to think. And you just keep doing it. And it becomes a habit, and you start replacing those thoughts. It's not a gimmick. It's not something that you're going to eliminate in one day of your life. If you've been thinking this way for 20 years of your life, it just isn't going to happen. It hasn't for me, at least. And if it does for you, tell me your secret, because I would love to know it. But in my life, I've seen major changes in my life, but it's taken years sometimes of me doing this exercise of replacing my thoughts. So anyway, that's what I want you to think about. How can you replace your thoughts and have a strategy in place for doing it? Don't just go into this half-heartedly. If you really want to be more assertive in your life, you need to come up with a strategy of dealing with your negative thoughts that keep you from being more assertive. So come up with a strategy, and we'll talk about this more in future weeks. I'm not just going to leave you alone with that, but I want you to be thinking about that now. So go ahead and be thinking about it now, and then in next week's, hopefully we can affirm some of the choices that you're making right now. So until next time, as always, embrace today with passion and intention, and don't die with your music still inside you.